Indigenous peoples in Canada are the Indigenous peoples within the boundaries of Canada. They comprise the First Nations, Inuit and Métis, although Indian is a term still commonly used in legal documents. The descriptors Indian and Eskimo have fallen into disuse in Canada, and most consider them to be pejorative. Quote, Aboriginal, as a collective noun, is a specific term of art used in some legal documents, including the Constitution Act, 1982, though in some circles that word is also falling into disfavor. Old Crow Flats and Bluefish Caves are some of the earliest known sites of human habitation in Canada. The Paleo-Indian Clovis, Plano and pre-Dorset cultures predate the current Indigenous peoples of the Americas. Projectile point tools, spears, pottery, bangles, chisels and scrapers mark archaeological sites, thus distinguishing cultural periods, traditions, and lithic reduction styles. The characteristics of Indigenous culture in Canada included permanent settlements, agriculture, civic and ceremonial architecture, complex societal hierarchies, and trading networks. The Métis culture of mixed blood originated in the mid-17th century when First Nations and Inuit people married Europeans, primarily the French. The Inuit had more limited interaction with European settlers during that early period. Various laws, treaties, and legislation have been enacted between European immigrants and First Nations across Canada. Aboriginal right to self-government provides opportunity to manage historical, cultural, political, healthcare and economic control aspects within First Peoples communities. As of the 2016 census, Indigenous peoples in Canada totaled 1,673,785 people, or 4.9% of the national population, with 977,230 First Nations people, 587,545 Métis, and 65,025 Inuit. 7.7% of the population under the age of 14 are of Indigenous descent. There are over 600 recognized First Nations governments or bands with distinctive cultures, languages, art, and music. National Indigenous Peoples Day recognizes the cultures and contributions of Indigenous peoples to the history of Canada. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples of all backgrounds have become prominent figures and have served as role models in the Indigenous community and helped to shape the Canadian cultural identity. In Section 35 of the Constitution Act, 1982, Aboriginal peoples of Canada includes the Indian, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Aboriginal peoples is a legal term encompassing all Indigenous peoples living in Canada. Aboriginal peoples has begun to be considered outdated and is slowly being replaced by the term Indigenous peoples. There is also an effort to recognize each and every Indigenous group as distinct nations, much like there are distinct European, African, and Asian cultures in their respective places. First Nations has come into general use since the 1970s, replacing Indians and Indian bands in everyday vocabulary. However, on reserves, First Nations is being supplanted by members of various nations referring to themselves by their group or ethnic identity. In conversation, this would be, I am Haida, or, we are Kwantlans, in recognition of their First Nations ethnicities. Also coming into general use since the 1970s, First Peoples refers to all Indigenous groups, i.e. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Notwithstanding Canada's location within the Americas, the term Native American is not used in Canada as it is typically used solely to describe the Indigenous peoples within the boundaries of the present-day United States. Native Canadians was often used in Canada to differentiate this American term until the 1980s. In contrast to the more specific Aboriginal, one of the issues with the term Native is its general applicability. In certain contexts, it could be used in reference to non-Indigenous peoples in regards to an individual place of origin, birth. For instance, people who were born or grew up in Calgary may call themselves Calgary natives, as in they are native to that city. With this in mind, even the term Native American, as another example, may very well indicate someone who is native to America rather than a person who is ethnically indigenous to the boundaries of the present-day United States. In this sense, native may encompass a broad range of populations and is therefore not recommended. The Indian Act sets the legal term Indian, designating that a person who pursuant to this act is registered as an Indian or is entitled to be registered as an Indian. Section 5 of the Act states that a registry shall be maintained, in which shall be recorded the name of every person who is entitled to be registered as an Indian under this Act. No other term is legally recognized for the purpose of registration, and the term Indian specifically excludes reference to Inuit as per Section 4 of the Act. Indian remains in place as the legal term used in the Canadian Constitution. However, its usage outside such situations can be considered